So I've been talking a little bit about the way recently, but possibly offering that as a different idea to how we view ourselves above and beyond even the idea of family. This, so I want to kind of go deeper into it, and it's always funny when I do these things because every now and then you kind of just come across a reference and go, "Hey, thanks for making that easy for me." So I'm pouring through some of my old favorites, and I came across something from Abraham Joshua Heschel, who once said that there are three ways that we meet or encounter God. In the world around us, through awe and worship, in the words of Scripture, through learning, and in the work of our hands, through deeds of justice and love. So for the next 3 months, I'm going to break each one of those down. So we'll spend September talking about worship and awe, and October with learning, and then November with action. So today we'll begin with meeting God in the world. In the beautiful and the sublime, which should not be confused with the young and the restless or the bold and the beautiful. A long time ago, during my cross-cultural experience class in seminary, our group was traveling through Canyon de Chelly in Arizona. This is where they have the remnants of the Anasazi villages built into the kind of cliff, the canyon walls. And about halfway through our tour there, a thunderstorm came up, and we had to take shelter in a rock overhang. And suddenly, we were in the middle of one of those Canyon Thunderstorm CDs that they sold millions of at the time. The place was just suddenly alive with beauty and with mystery, and it begged for silence. But a few folks in the group started talking and laughing loudly and incessantly. And I'm going to be completely honest with you here right now, because it grated on me. For a few moments, I was in this place of wonder, and it was just ripped away by the noise. And honestly, in that moment, it took every ounce of my being to not yell, "Shut up!" I don't know if you've ever been in that kind of place before, and of course, I never would have done that because at the time, I was hoping I would be ordained, and then mostly probably because somebody would have told my mom on me, and she'd have given me what for. But that moment actually taught me something. And that is sometimes we don't know what to do with awe. Silence feels unnatural to us. Sometimes it even feels threatening. So we fill it with chatter. And you know who knows this best? The police. One of their strongest techniques is just sit there quietly and wait for you to fill the silence because we hate silence so much. Honestly, I've seen this fear of silence in a lot of places, not just, in churches, but in classrooms, hospital waiting rooms. Anywhere the silence feels unbearable. But awe needs room to breathe. It's like Elijah's whisper, right? Every time we cover wonder with words, we miss that invitation from God as it breaks into that silence. And I wonder how often we do the same kind of thing in our walk along the way. We talk, we sing, we plan, we explain. But sometimes the most faithful thing is just to pause long enough for wonder to sink in. For the beautiful and the sublime to break open our hearts of stone. I think that's where Job was for most of the book. I mean, let's be honest, the man had an argument, he had a point. But what he wanted was words, he wanted explanations, he wanted reasons. He literally wanted a trial. But when God finally spoke, God didn't give him answers. God answered him with awe. A voice out of the whirlwind. A torrent of questions stretched from the foundations of the earth to the cry of a raven in the night. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Who shut in the sea with doors when it burst forth from the womb? Who cuts a channel for the torrents of rain to water a land where no one lives? God doesn't soothe Job with philosophy. God overwhelms Job with awe, with grandeur, with creation itself, its power, its beauty, its scale, and even its smallest details. And Job is undone. Not because he understands, but because he's awakened. I think we've forgotten how to live this way. I think we've lost the language of the sublime. Even our ability to define it, I think, has been lost in what we deem to be more important tasks. We learn in order to use. We measure, we weigh, we calculate, and we consume. We train our children to master the equations, but not to marvel at the stars. We hand them charts instead of wonder. And so reverence is driven out. The world becomes raw material, a warehouse of resources. The seas are no longer mysterious, they're shipping routes. The mountains are no longer holy, they're real estate. The stars are no longer hymns of light, they're data points in a lab. And the consequence of all this? It's not that hard to see, really. The universe itself becomes a marketplace. And when I say the universe itself, you can literally name a star now. You can pay for it. And if the world is only power and stuff to us, and we are all absorbed in a kind of gold rush, then the only God you encounter in that world is a golden calf. Callousness is the root of sin. And this has been going on for a while. I don't know if anybody here has read Moby Dick before. Okay, 'cause when I first read it, I remember being a little frustrated. The man spends 25% of his time in the book describing whales, whaling equipment, and the tools and the techniques of processing whales once they've been brought on a ship. And I just kept thinking, go get on with it, man. But later, I came to understand that was the story. That Melville forced us to wade through lists and measurements and charts and methods because that's how humans look at creation, raw material. We catalog it, we break it down, we build the tools to take from it whatever we want. And when the world doesn't bend to our will, we turn into Ahab and become just a little bit obsessed to the point of madness. I think that's what our forgetting of the sublime reminds us or warns us against. Learning in order to use. Treating the universe as a warehouse of resources, imagining that its sole purpose is our satisfaction. And Moby Dick becomes less a book about revenge and more a mirror of our own callousness. When awe is replaced by utility. But what is the divine? How would we define it if we've kind of lost these words? And this is where I turn to those authors that I go to more and more often, or the old, standbys that I go to. And you get ideas like the sublime being that which our words and our forms and our categories just can never reach. It is just something that is sensed. And every grain of sand and every drop of water, every flower in the summer, every flake of snow in the winter, that arouses in us this sense of wonder and awe. William Wordsworth described it this way: a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns and the round ocean and the living air and the blue sky and in the mind of man. A motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of thought, and rolls through all things. The sublime is the way that this world, anything in this world, reacts to the presence of God. It's never the ultimate aspect of reality that has any meaningfulness in and of itself. It is not God, but it points to God. It's not a thing or a quality, it's an event. It's an act of God. It's a marvel. And thus even a mountain is not regarded as a thing. What seems to be stone is drama. What seems to be natural is wondrous. The most exalted objects, such as heaven or the stars, and we ourselves have this kind of mystery in common. We all continually depend on the living God. And that's why our reaction to the sublime is wonder and amazement. Now, this isn't just Heschel and Wordsworth and me talking. It's written all over in the story of faith. The Bible knows awe. The Bible insists on it. People find the sublime in the largest things and in the smallest things. I mean, think of Jacob at Bethel. He falls asleep on a stone, which had to be real comfortable, of course. But he has a vision of angels and wakes up saying, surely God was in this place and I did not know it. The ordinary becomes charged with the presence. Elijah, whom I mentioned earlier in 1 Kings 19, does not find God in the earthquake or in the fire, but in the whisper. This small thing. And probably my favorite is Moses at the burning bush. He encounters God in a thorn bush. Not a cedar of Lebanon, not a lofty mountain peak, but a thorn bush. There's a rabbi from the Middle Ages, Rabbi Korka, who said, there is no place in the world empty of the Shekinah, the presence of God. Not even a lowly thorn bush. Think about that. The divine presence could have blazed forth in majesty from the temple, or thundered from Sinai, and eventually did, of course. But it chose the ordinary, the disposable. The bush that most of us would either pass by or rip out of our gardens became a sanctuary. And that's an important part. The sublime is not reserved for grandeur alone. It lives in the lowly, the overlooked, the things we dismiss as useless. If we see the world as a marketplace, then the thorn bush is just firewood. But if we live with awe, even a thorn bush can be aflame with God. And let's be honest, folks, we're not very good at awe anymore. We think we're masters of the universe until a thunderstorm knocks out the power and suddenly we're dashing around for flashlights and candles and we're freaking out because it feels like the 1800s again. Wondering if our alarms are going to turn back on in time to get us to work tomorrow morning. Turns out we're not as in control as we think. So what does all this mean for us? First, I think it means that awe is not optional. That without it, we treat even people like commodities. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think one of the greatest shifts of this kind of thinking in our culture is when the personnel department, root word person, turned into the human resources department. When people are measured by usefulness instead of reverenced as image bearers of God. And here's where I'm going to get in some trouble. And I, of course, have to do this right before review day, right? This thinking of human beings and other people as commodities, this includes getting people to fill our pews, to make us feel comfortable, so that we know the church will stay open long enough to bury us. All this means we have to relearn awe. That we have to pay attention to the sparrow, to the whisper, to the thorn bush. And finally, that we have to teach awe. Teach our children not just facts, but reverence. Let them see butterflies as hymns in motion, not just specimens on a chart. As Abraham Heschel said, awe is a way of being in relationship with the mystery of all reality. To lose awe is to live alone in a warehouse, which kind of explains the loneliness epidemic rise, if you think about it. To live alone in a warehouse. And to recover awe is to rediscover a world alive with God. Job was overwhelmed, not because God explained suffering, but because God reawakened him to awe. And that's our call too. To hear thunder is more than to hear weather. To see a sparrow is more than biology. To treat the earth is more than a marketplace. To recover the beautiful and the sublime is the language of faith. And in doing so, maybe we'll become less callous, less numb, less self-centered, and more alive in the presence of God. Amen.